All of them are one. It was hard to
You have a
tell.
tall chair. I can't see, so it'd be fine. What do you do to it? You breathe on it. It wrinkles.
It was just
Set the clock to real time.
Oh, but all the meetings.
Call up Steve Jobs. It's close. Computers can't do that. No, key to the central scrutinizer.
It's just silly. It's just silly.
I wish I could fix my chair.
You can probably,
Most punches now.
probably change it with.
Welcome, everyone, to the February 24, 2020 meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. Before we get to the agenda items, we've got a couple of housekeeping things we always have to go through. So let's start with those. Has everyone had the opportunity to look at the January 22nd minutes? Any modifications, changes, corrections?
I move to accept the minutes.
Okay, do we have a motion to accept? Seconded by Commissioner Struckhoff. All those in favor? Passes 7-0. Oh, crap. We have any reports from any committees from the last month? Commissioner
I
Weaver.
attended my first Metropolitan Planning Organization meeting a week or so ago, and we were done in about 20 minutes, so maybe we can do the same thing tonight and Wednesday. Interesting organization, I think, and I'm looking forward to serving there.
Well, thank you for doing it. Communications. Do we have any written communications from the public that didn't make it to the packet for tonight?
I believe you all did receive some communications that were emailed to you directly. Please make sure to remember to include those in your ex parte disclosures.
Or for Wednesday night, an item on Wednesday's agenda. Any written communications from staff, other planning commissioners, or anyone else? None? Any written action of any waiver requests or determinations by the city engineer?
No.
No. This time, ask any commissioners to disclose any ex parte communications they may have had on any of the agenda items tonight. All right, good. Seeing none. Any commissioners intend to abstain from any of the agenda items tonight?
Mr. Chair? It's my intention to do so. In my day job, I work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and while I don't have any knowledge other than what's in the public domain about the matters, it's my understanding that the applicant on items 2 and 3 is involved in legal matters that my office is handling or was, and perhaps one of the principals of that entity is as well. And so my association with the office, I think, would require me to abstain from those just to avoid the appearance of bias or conflict.
All right. Any others? This time we open the floor to general public comment. At this time, if any member of the public wishes to come up to the podium, you can speak for up to 3 minutes on any item related to planning that is not on the agenda. Any member of the public wish to speak? All right, seeing none, we'll go to the regular agenda. Just to let everybody know, we've had a request from staff to move item number 5 up to the top for a staff member that needs to leave early. And also the printed agendas that you're looking at, items 2 and 3 have been reversed. So your printed agenda items 3 is now number 2 and 2 is now number 3, but those both apply to the same parcel of land. So with that, let's start with item number 5, to consider initiating a text amendment to revise and update references from Horizon 2020 to Plan 2040.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Avery Kerner, and I am a planning aide with the City and County Planning Office. And this evening before you, I have a text amendment initiation request for TA-20-00001. And this is to update references from Horizon 2020 to Plan 2040 within the City of Lawrence Land Development Code. So Plan 2040 was adopted back in November of 2019, but currently the Land Development Code still references Horizon 2020. So this text amendment is necessary in order for us to go back and revise and update references from Horizon 2020 to Plan 2040. And so tonight, staff recommends the Planning Commission initiate text amendment TA-20-00001 to revise and update references from Horizon 2020 to Plan 2040 within the City of Lawrence Land Development Code. And once initiated, staff can then go back and revise and update these references and then bring them back for your consideration, with final action being that they'll be taken to City Commission for final review and consideration. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you. Have any questions for Avery? All right, thanks. This time we open this matter up for public comment. Any members of the public that wish to speak to this proposed text amendment or the initiation of this text amendment have the opportunity to come to the podium, and ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the commission. Anyone have any questions or comments? Or a motion? Commissioner Struckle.
I move the Planning Commission initiate the text amendment to revise the sections of Chapter 20 in the Land Development Code to refer to Horizon 2040.
Have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Ashworth. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 7-0. I'll bring us to agenda item number 1. Oh, you're still here. Consider approving a preliminary plat for Drake Addition at 429 and 425 North Iowa Street.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day. I'm going to start off by first apologizing. I am still recovering my voice, and I end up in coughing fits periodically, so hopefully we'll get through most of this without that happening. This item that you have before you is a preliminary plat. Its intent is to consolidate several parcels, some of which are platted, some of which are not, into a single development parcel with future application that would be submitted to the planning office for site plan. Part of this application also includes the dedication of new right-of-way, although it does not include the full dedication of right-of-way that would be typical of a principal arterial street. The subject property is zoned IG, as is a majority of the property surrounding it. There is some IL zoning down to the southeast. There is PCD zoning right at the corner of River Ridge Road and North Iowa Street, and there's some other mixed residential zoning located along the east side of North Iowa as we extend further to the north. The image on the right highlights what the land use pattern looks like in this immediate area. This is just an image of the plat that is also in your packet. It highlights the parcels that are included. There are a number of structures that are on this property. One structure will remain. One structure has been applied for a demolition permit. This slide highlights the right-of-way that is being dedicated. The proposed piece that's being dedicated would bring that alignment along that west side of North Iowa, consistent with the adjacent properties to the north and south of it. The dotted line represents the center line of what that right-of-way is. Total right-of-way width in this area is 90 feet. This is information that is summarized in the staff report. The right-of-way that's required for the property, 150 feet from total right-of-way, would be required for a principal arterial. 75 feet would be each property's 1/2 of that requirement. The right-of-way that is proposed is about 20 feet along that west side that brings it consistent with the adjacent properties. The variance criteria are summarized on this slide, and they are also included in your staff report. Staff's finding of that variance evaluation was that the reduction is consistent with the adjacent property owners that have dedicated right-of-way in this area. There are no street improvements that are planned, no widening that is extended in this area, and there is no harm to the public by approval of the variance, and staff supports the variance, as does the city engineer. Staff's recommendation is for approval of the variance request and also for approval of the preliminary plat. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Have any questions for Sandy? All right, thanks. I think there will be, though. Is the applicant here? And if so, the applicant wishes to speak.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Hamby with BG Consultants, representing the applicant and property owner. Staff has done an excellent job with the staff report, and we support the findings, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you. Might have some.
Okay,
Let's see.
thanks.
This time we'll open this matter up to the public for comment. Anyone that wants to comment on this, please come up, sign your in. Please state your name clearly, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any members of the public wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the commission. Who would like to start? I just have one question. Generally, we see these as separate items, a preliminary plat and a variance. Are these going to be two separate votes, or?
Yes, we would ask that you take
Okay.
two actions. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Willie?
I have a question for either of you, really. Which building is slated for demolition and which building is remaining? The building close to the road that's...
The building close to the road is the one that's going to be demoed.
Okay, so that would be your only setback issue, so...
It's been
Okay,
involved.
thank you.
Any other questions? Well, hearing that, I guess we can take up the preliminary plat. Anyone want to make a motion on the preliminary plat portion? Commissioner Struckoff.
I move that we approve the preliminary plat for Drake Addition at 429 and 525 North Iowa Street.
I have a motion to approve. I have a second. Seconded by Commissioner Willie. All those in favor? Passes 7-0. That brings us to the variance. Commissioner Struckoff.
I move that we approve the variance requested for the preliminary plat at 429 and 525 North Iowa for reduction of the right-of-way to 50 feet.
All right. A second. Second by Commissioner Willie. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 7-0. All right, thank you. It takes us to item number 2 on our updated electronic agenda, number 3 on the public's printed agenda, which is to consider approving a request to rezone approximately 3.96 acres from planned unit development to RS10 located in the 1800 block of Quail Creek Drive. And I just note that Commissioner Sinclair has abstained himself from these two items, which drops the commission to 6, which is still sufficient for us to go forward. We're still waiting for one commissioner to arrive that's late, so.
Good evening, Commissioners. These two items were related, so the presentation is combined in this next element. There are two actions that are being considered. One is the rezoning and the other is the preliminary plat. And then we have a subpart of that rezoning, which I'll try to explain. The subject property is located along Quail Creek Drive and includes property both north and south of that existing local street. The property itself is part of the original Alvamar PUD, which was created in the late 60s. It's been modified and contracted and expanded over time, but essentially the original PUD is outlined in the salmon color on the slide. The area that we know as the Alvamar PUD was more recently rezoned. It still shows some of that original zoning underneath in the background, but that has current zoning and is not part of the PUD today. If you recall, these planned unit developments under the very old code now have their own zoning. So any type of development application outside of what was originally approved requires rezoning, and in this case also requires subdivision approval. This is just a highlight of the original Alvamar PUD, and what I wanted to show to you is how much of this green space, open space, was part of the golf course that the original development was centered around. So the property that we were talking about is part of the golf course. Over time, this land has been removed from the golf course, and the applicant is looking to create development parcels here. The land use that we find in this area, open space is the predominant use of the golf course, and we see low-density detached residential zoning subdivisions that surround the perimeter of the golf course. Interior to that neighborhood, as we move out to the edges of the neighborhood, we see more multifamily commercial uses at the four corners of the overall neighborhood. One other element that I would like to point out is floodplain. The location of the floodplain within this property was a significant concern. Staff had quite a bit of discussion with the engineers, with the city stormwater engineer, and among the planners about how best to address the floodplain. A portion of this is actually floodway, so there is no development. We thought that it would be important to put as many protections as possible over this floodplain area. Oops, I'm sorry, backwards. This property is located within Tier 1 of Plan 2040, and a couple of the applicable policies that we believe are appropriate and related to this development request is the accommodation of infill housing and to increase overall density in certain zoning districts. The PUD district in and of itself really is an antiquated and outdated zoning district in a lot of ways. So moving the property into an appropriate zoning district that's in the land development code is also a plus in staff's mind. Wanted to give you some idea of what the development patterns looked like within the overall neighborhood, the Alvamar PUD. A good portion of it has that PUD overlay district, and then this western part of the neighborhood has more conventional zoning. So this application is actually bringing that property more into that conventional zoning pattern that we see in other parts of the neighborhood. We mentioned the floodplain. There are a couple of applicable policies in Plan 2040 that we went ahead and identified for you in the staff report, and they're just highlighted here on this slide. As far as the suitability of the existing PUD, the more opportunities that we have to get rid of these old PUDs, which are very hard to administer, both for staff in the city and also for the property owners sometimes, it's better. So the suitability of this request is appropriate given the proposed request. We don't anticipate there will be any detrimental effects from the rezoning. There certainly will be the addition of development lots in that area, and that certainly is a perception that property owners may have some issues or concerns with. It's part of the golf course, it's part of recognized open space that's been there for a number of decades. The preliminary plat element of this request includes 2 platted lots and 2 tracts. The 2 tracts are the areas that encompass and capture what that floodplain area is, so that's another level of setting that area aside to be protected, along with staff's recommendation about the zoning we'll touch on in just a moment. This slide really is intended to highlight the various easements that are being dedicated with this project. We have a specific drainage easement that is being dedicated that will help convey the natural flow and course of stormwater runoff throughout this area, as well as the floodplain. The 2 tracts are highlighted or outlined in red on this slide. There is a variance application associated with the plat, and that has to do with the construction of a sidewalk. Typically, when we have subdivisions, we require that full public improvement plans and public improvements be constructed at the time of the subdivision. In this particular case, this street already exists, and it was constructed with sidewalk on one side of the street. The applicant is requesting to defer the construction of the sidewalk, and staff met with the applicant as well as through our discussions at the staff level of the appropriateness of constructing this one piece of sidewalk and came to the conclusion that the execution of an agreement not to protest the formation of a benefit district still protects the city's interest to put a sidewalk in the future. This affects one of the 2 lots because there is an existing sidewalk in that area, which I thought I had a slide of. The other element affecting that sidewalk construction is there is a bridge area that goes over that floodplain, and that bridge is very narrow and would have to have additions or reconstructed to be able to make it wide enough to add sidewalk. So for those reasons, staff's recommendation is to support the request for the deferral of the sidewalk with this application. Staff's recommendation on the zoning is to support the request for the zoning to the RS district, but to exclude that piece of the floodplain. And staff's recommendation is that we're asking this body to initiate that part of the property to be rezoned to the OSFP, so open space floodplain overlay. This adds another level of protection that prevents development of that property in the future. The city actually can count that additional protection toward our flood insurance rate program because we're taking actions to help protect the floodplain and limit development impacts on that. But in the code, sometimes we have the ability to do something that's called a lesser change. In this particular case, open space is not within that table that allows us to use that sliding scale to just make a straight recommendation. So we have to take an extra step on this particular application to request or initiate an action to rezone that specifically to open space. With regard to the preliminary plat, there was one technical cleanup item that we needed to revise. We made the applicant aware of that need on the preliminary plat. Staff's recommendation is to support the approval of the preliminary plat. I know that's a lot of information. It's a lot of different topics, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sandy. Any questions for Sandy right now? Commissioner Ashworth.
The slide where you showed the drainage way, that green area that looks like it's running north, is that the open space that you were talking about, the flood?
The green, actually, these are, what I did on this slide was to highlight easements, and I believe the green here is actually utility easement. So within this tract, outside of the floodplain, there's actually an existing sanitary sewer that needs to be covered by easement. So this is actually a utility easement on that part of it. The overall tract can still be used for overland flow and capturing the stormwater runoff that comes through this tract. The blue is the drainage along the front of Lot 1 or the north lot, which is where that stormwater flow is kind of that surface flow is kind of coming across that property from this direction over till it gets into the creek here.
So the designation for open space is just the gray?
It would be actually the part that's outlined in red.
Okay.
The two tracks. It's hard to see. There's a lot of lines on this plat.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, just to clarify, staff's request is that part of the rezoning is the rezoning request excludes the floodway,
Yes.
and that you're asking the planning commission to initiate rezoning of the floodway as the
Yes, and
Lot of
so
open
what
space.
that, structurally what that means, procedurally what that means is that you would initiate the rezoning of what is Tract A and Tract B as shown on that preliminary plat. If it's initiated, we will bring a zoning application back to you at a future meeting to rezone that property from PUD to OSFP. Make sense?
So these two items together are going to have 4 separate votes.
There's a couple of different actions, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. This time we'd ask the applicant if you'd like to come up to the podium and give your presentation.
I'm Andrea Wishop. I'm with Atlas Surveyors. I was just going to answer any questions that you may have from a survey standpoint about this plot and zoning.
Do you have any questions for the applicant at this time?
Not yet.
Okay, not yet.
All righty.
All right, thank you. At this time, we open the floor for public comment. Any members of the public that wish to comment on these items, please come up to the podium, sign in. Please state your name so that we can address you properly, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
I'm Dave Barnhill, and I own the Pointy lot on Tam O'Shanter that is the second lot in. And we have consistently had drainage problems since they've reworked the drainage on the golf course. My concern is that pay attention to that drainage and make sure that it is appropriately done, because we've lost an area the size of this over the last 3-4 years. It didn't used to flood that way. It does now. Adding more houses seems to me like it isn't going to help. So that's my concern for you all to know. I sent some photos. I can provide video. It's all date and time stamped and all that good stuff. But drainage is a problem over there, and the underlying applicants are aware of that. So,
Thank you for sending the information to us prior to the meeting. It's
Sure.
always helpful to have that.
yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in that neighborhood since 1990. I've never seen it like it. It has been consistently for years now, you know, and we've lost an area the size of this. So.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Douglas Lawrence, I already signed in, thank you. Appreciate your work, Commission. I just wanted to voice a concern about further development along the golf course. We bought our home 11 years ago on Greenbrier Drive. Our backyard faces the golf course. It used to be the second public side tee box, but it has changed now. I don't know what it is now. I'm voicing a general concern, and that is that in the development of the new golf course, lots of things have changed. Aesthetically, lots of things have changed. And as an owner of property at the golf course, our little bucolic neighborhood has shifted to something that resembles, I'll try to be kind, Bauhaus, Germany in the 30s, late 30s. It's not very attractive, but that's neither here nor there. The development of the land is a slippery slope as far as we see it, and we would like to just caution permission to do further development in that area, and that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment?
Hello, my name is Diane Carls, and I previously owned the property that Dave Barnhill just spoke about. I was surprised when I bought that property to find out that it was floodplain, because I'd been told it wasn't. But I was assured by the city when I went in, don't worry, it always goes on the other side. And I found during the time I lived there, it did always go on the other side, a considerable distance, and several times a year. It is subsequently, as Mr. Barnhill mentioned, it's much worse. The golf course had installed some riprap along one side of the creek, and the water was so strong it took the riprap out last year, and it was really quite impressive. I was there one time when it happened, and it was just amazing to watch. A little scary, actually. I guess the other thing I would say is one of the things we were assured by Fritzl when the golf course went to their ownership, that none of our views would be impaired. This house, if it goes in, would be directly behind the house at 3522 Tam O'Shanter that we're talking about, and it would to some degree obstruct the view. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any other members of the public that wish to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the commission. I would propose that if we have questions or things, kind of go in the order of the rezoning and then a preliminary plat and the variance, and then that secondary reinitiated rezoning. Any questions by any commissioners? Commissioner Ashworth?
In that, it just thinking about the order that you just mentioned, so discussions about the flooding would would be involved in the preliminary plat?
Well, I don't know. It might be involved with all of it, because I think what we're hearing from some of the neighbors is they'd prefer it not be rezoned to permit any development. But so, you have a question?
Well, I do have a question. Just if we could bring up that slide again that showed the drainage way and the floodplain, and I'm wondering if Mr. Barnhill can sort of explain, looking at that picture, where the water is going. Some of those pictures you sent, if you could in some way describe where that is.
So, can you
Is this
see
your party?
Yeah, you got it, 3522. Okay. So, the flooding emanates from 579, am I reading that right? Or 879. Yeah, so it's at altitude?
Okay.
Okay.
Sort of.
There is a pipe that runs under the fairway there. That pipe is clearly grossly inadequate, or it's stuffed with stuff, or something's happened. That was replaced when they did the major reconfiguration of the golf course. I can't give you a date or time on that. I just didn't pay that much attention because it wasn't affecting me then. I lived higher up the hill. And we certainly observed it because Mom would call us and say, it's flooding, for 5 years. So this has gone on for quite a while. It's considerably worse the last couple of years now that the course is back open and they've got what drainage they modified. The real problem is beginning with the neck there, that just overflows. It's that simple. There's also a tremendous amount of flow that comes down this way, and it all arrives and goes right across the corner of my lot right there, which is no longer pointed like that. It is more like this, including the emptiness. So does that answer the question some? And you know, we observe it coming down from there. Really, the center of this lot used to be a pond full of frogs. It was great. So anyway, there's what I know.
Any other questions? Comments on
Question.
any part of this?
Just a question for staff. There was a mention in the staff report referring to Plan 2040 and the upcoming stream buffer ordinances. Would the green utility easement basically become that stream buffer? Like, what would be the width of that buffer?
The buffer would be dependent on a study that would be required to look at what is the water coming through. Staff did receive the photos that were in your packet as well, and I did talk with the city stormwater engineer about this specific issue. And I think it is accurate to state that the current property owner is aware of what the flooding is doing, that the pipe is probably undersized, because the city stormwater engineer said that he has conveyed that information to the property owner in the past. This is flooding that is occurring on private property. So there's really very limited options that the city has at this point to be able to address that in any additional manner based on the codes that we have today. What we can do is, within the boundary of the application, establish the correct easements to be able to protect and preserve. Now, that is a little bit downstream, if you will, from the Barnhart property.
So Sandy, if that's the case, then the order of operations, I mean, should these requests be approved tonight, would be before building permits or a site plan is approved, the stormwater engineer's concerns would all have to be addressed. Is that correct?
The city stormwater engineer's concerns have been addressed within the scope of this property.
Okay.
Please remember, there's a number of processes that still have to happen. You're addressing tonight a preliminary plat. There is still a final plat that is required for the applicant. There's a little bit of public improvement plan work that is required to be done with this for sanitary sewer, water extensions, and then there's the required building permits. Now, the final plat and the building permits don't come back to this body. Those are administrative tasks. But your approval tonight doesn't give them charge to pull a building permit tomorrow. We've still got a bit of work to do before that can happen. I believe the applicant is here tonight. The applicant's representative is here. So certainly that message is getting back to them that this is a flooding issue that should probably be dealt with. I know city staff has made themselves available for consultation as needed, and we've gone out on complaints in the past as needed for floodplain issues and violations on this property. So it is something we are aware of and keep an eye on.
So if I understand correctly, are you saying there's nothing that we can do about it because it's private property, or what are you telling me?
The flooding that's taking place and the pooling and the backup of the flooding that's taking place is occurring on private property for the most part. What we're hearing from the property owner is there is some downstream effect, and that's between property owners. And that was the conversation I had with city stormwater engineer earlier today.
And part of that is that where the flooding is happening and the origination of that flooding is not part of the property that is the subject of your consideration this evening.
But the property that is part of our consideration this evening, what effect, will that have a greater effect on that flooding, or how would it impact, or is that something that I don't know the answer to?
I think that is a very natural and very common perception that any additional pavement and development has an immediate cause and effect relationship. The city staff has reviewed the application, and the application is compliant with city code. So
to answer my question, will it have an impact on the people that we've heard speak today if we vote to modify, or?
Based on what I understand of the application and city staff review, I would say no. It should not have an effect. Now, somebody can go out and do something crazy with their property, and then we're going to have to address that if that were to happen. Say somebody comes in and paves their whole lot. That could potentially have an effect or an impact. Now, we're going to be addressing that from a different aspect. So.
Okay.
And if I could also add, I think staff has also taken a look at this and tried to work on some of that mitigation. Part of that is what we're asking you to initiate a rezoning to, which is to place more than just the regulatory floodplain and floodway in an OS-FP zone that gives it floodplain regulation protection.
Commissioner Willie.
Sandy, do you know, is there a homeowners association that covers this development?
I don't know that for certain.
Can I ask her, Mr. Barnhill? Do you know?
I don't think there's anything formal.
Could you step up, sorry, to the mic, since it's all being taped?
I don't believe there's anything formal anymore. I'm really not sure. I'm not a member of a overarching, there used to be covenants. When I bought my first house over there, it came with pages of covenants about what one could do and couldn't do. So, but I don't believe any of that's really happening.
Okay. So in terms of it being a golf course development, in terms of protecting viewscapes or anything like that, there's no formal documents or agreements with the owners of the golf course and the open space?
Not the current owners. The original Alvamar was really quite marvelous. You weren't allowed to build fences, and people were supposed to be able to walk the lot lines, you know, and just wave if you see somebody doing that, right? It was pretty neat. We are seeing that eroded in more ways than just one.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
I guess I have a comment. A lot of times when we have an applicant come forward, we ask and see if they have dialogued with the neighbors before the item comes to us. Do we... Andrea, is it Wiscombe? Is Wiscombe? Wisham. Do you mind coming forward? So I know you're the representative of the applicant here.
Yeah.
Do you know, has there been dialogue with the neighboring properties?
I believe so, yeah. I believe my client has went to some of the neighboring properties immediately adjacent to where we're going to be doing some the preliminary plat at, and just kind of made them aware of what's going on and what the plan is, what the tentative plan is, and not knowing, not having any absolute nailed down of what exactly we're going to do there. But yes, there has been some discussions with the neighbors, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I just have some general questions for staff about the variance and the potential of a special benefit district in the future.
Sure.
I mean, I kind of understand where it's coming from. It to require a sidewalk that stretches one or two lots that starts nowhere and goes nowhere is kind of ridiculous to require at this time. But what would trigger the request to form a special benefit district in the future?
I would imagine that request would come either from surrounding property owners being interested in establishing more walkability within the neighborhood, any kind of street or road project that the city would propose for some reason, where we were doing a major significant street improvement project, we would probably be looking at doing sidewalks at that point in time, or sidewalk on the one side. The feasibility of that bridge crossing over Quail Creek, that being widened, that at that time, maybe a design that would make it wide enough to extend the sidewalk beyond just the single lot on that north side. Those are just some that I can think of. I don't know that that's an exhaustive list.
You aware of any other agreements not to protest along that stretch of road?
No, most of these subdivisions were platted between the early 70s and mid 80s in this particular area, so it's unlikely that there are any protest agreements. I didn't do that kind of research. They were constructed at a time when sidewalks were only required on one side of the street. They have sidewalk on one side of the street, so they were compliant, so there probably would not have been any similar agreement. The topic may come up, as Mr. Lawrence mentioned, future development of other portions of the golf course could be enough to trigger executing the agreement.
But then you'd only have one lot, and the rest of the neighbors would have to a certain percentage would have to voluntarily agree to join the benefit district. Is that correct? Or can that be imposed upon them?
Well, you can have a one-lot benefit district.
Yeah.
So there would be the one property owner.
Still, that would be sidewalk in front of one house on the whole street.
Well, and it depends if you look at the rest of that land, if there's some other development option in the future that develops part of the golf course that extends. When we looked at the Alvamar project back in 2013, I think, there was a request that had a subdivision over that whole north end of Quail Creek for, I want to say it was maybe 6 or 8 residential lots on the north side. So it's not inconceivable that we could see a development request in the future.
But for the existing properties, how would they get caught up in a special benefit district? Would they have to opt into it or agree
Well,
to it?
For this one property, what they're agreeing is to not protest the formation of a benefit district.
I understand
right?
that.
So the other property owners, if the city created a benefit district that had multiple lots in here, yes, the city has to go through the process to form the benefit district. Is there an opportunity for properties to protest it and cause it to fail? Yes, that's possible.
I just had to say Queens Road is just
Yes,
popped into my mind.
it was not a recommendation given lightly by the city engineer.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Willing.
Just a comment, and it's probably not even the biggest piece of the puzzle here, but in terms of the sidewalk, the rest of the neighborhood only has one sidewalk on one side, and really the bridge, not having to replace the bridge, kind of, in my mind, makes it certainly feasible to grant that waiver. That's just a small piece of the puzzle in everything else we have to deal with here, but I'd throw that out there.
Okay. Any other general comments? Commissioner Ashworth?
Just in terms of how we'd work on each piece of this, I don't really have a problem with the change in the zoning per staff's recommendations, updating the zoning, or the sidewalk, but I am hesitant about the preliminary plat, at least for that one property. I know it's 2 properties together, but I'm real hesitant about that north property. So I don't know what kind of assurances we'd have with a final plat that being taken care of.
And that's reviewed administratively, correct? The final
The
plat?
final plat is administrative. I guess I should clarify that it's administrative. It would actually have to go to City Commission for the acceptance of the easements that are proposed with it.
So there would be a possibility of one more public review at the city commission.
Yes.
But more than likely, this would be on the consent agenda and somebody would have to ask it removed.
Happens all the time.
I know, I'm just kind of getting that information. Commissioner Willie?
So I guess what we're hearing is the city stormwater engineer feels like the preservation of the floodplain, if we make our recommendation to rezone that portion, and the additional easement and a drainage easement gets close enough that the residential lot would be a buildable lot. There's also kind of a question of buyer beware, that there's a lot of things going on in and around in terms of drainage on this property, and that part is kind of out of our purview, I would think. So on one hand, I feel like we've had some experts look at this and they feel like this is a reasonable, not solution, but that this will mitigate some of the flooding there. It's also, just to speak to flooding this year and last winter, we're so saturated. I mean, this is, not that it couldn't get worse than this, but this is especially bad flooding, and part of that's the year, and we just happened to hit a time where there really was a lot of activity there. Our farm's the same way, that there's just so much more flooding than usual. Not to say that you build a house there that won't happen again, because I'm sure that it will, but it's, I don't think it makes for a great lot. It kind of depends on how much area is left after you take out all those pieces, but I'm not sure that that gives us enough reason to say no.
So why don't we start with the rezoning? Any additional conversation about the rezoning request or any motions on that? Everyone's very quiet.
I'm happy to start with a motion for the open space floodplain zoning.
Okay.
Start that, okay. I move that we approve, let's see.
Maybe.
How can I say this correctly? The planning commission initiate, oh,
Sure.
please.
Might I recommend that we actually take up the actual zoning application first, followed by the initiation second?
Because the zoning excludes a piece of property, okay? So
that would be, move that planning commission recommend approval of the request to rezone approximately 3.6 acres, less the land area included in proposed Tract A and B as shown in the preliminary plat of Quail Creek from PUD to RS10 based on the findings presented in the staff report, and forwarding it to the City Commission.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? A second by Commissioner Struckoff. Any further discussion? All those in favor? 6-0. Now, to initiate the rezoning.
I move that we recommend, the Planning Commission initiate a rezoning from PUD to OSFP, the Open Space Floodplain Overlay District, for approximately 0.86 acres.
A motion, have a second. Second by Commissioner Struckoff. Any additional comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? 6-0. That brings us to the harder ones. So, Commissioner Ashworth, what are your concerns about the preliminary plat?
My concerns about the preliminary plat are the flooding issues. I recognize that there's a utility easement, a floodway easement, and a drainage easement. And it really depends on how that property is developed. Given that the city engineer has looked at it, but it's hard for me to think that any more impervious surface on that area won't exacerbate the flooding. And yes, it was a wet year, but we're anticipating more and more wet years. I mean, when it's going to rain in the future, it's going to really rain. And so maybe that's maybe that's a fix in the final plat, maybe the pipes and the drainage. It's just, I have a concern about that northern piece of property being developed.
I can't help but think that, given what we've seen happen to Alvamar over the years, that more and more of it's going to be chipped away and turned into some sort of housing or more impervious surface. And if, the problem is we only look at one little piece of property, and we know that many things upstream affect what's going to happen to this piece of property, and what this piece of property does will have an impact downstream. So I don't know how we address those in a preliminary plat, other than to say that, we recognize that these issues are prevalent and they're just going to get worse. So I
guess one little piece of information is that piece of property is right next to the stream, as opposed to other pieces of property. It just adds as more, that whole piece of property could be a buffer.
And as pointed out by staff, we've got a conflict here in what's happening between private property owners.
Yeah.
If this was along a public street or a public waterway, there'd be more control. But so it's really what I think staff is suggesting is, if this is exacerbated by what's happening on a golf course, that the residents would have to take action directly against the owner of the golf course to rectify that. So, where does that leave us?
I'd like to hear other thoughts.
Looks like she has something to say.
I wasn't going to offer. I wonder if we aren't setting up a conflict between the new property owner and the owner of the golf course by moving forward. Or setting up a potential conflict. I mean, saying we don't have a way to speak into that process. It's going to be between neighbors, but we're allowing that new neighbor to be there we think may have a difficulty. So I wonder about our role there.
I don't know. It's also, from what we're hearing, is having an impact on existing neighbors right now. So it's going to.
That was my feeling also, is that we are not setting it up, but it already exists. This condition exists, and it's getting worse. It may continue to get worse, whatever our decision here tonight. I would prefer, and I wish there were a remedy in the site plan process and more review by the stormwater engineer upon submission of the development plans to address this with additional engineering or construction, that is, construction designed to remedy the flooding issue, be that better drainage, more capacity. I note that all the existing easements and things like that will be presented to the stormwater engineer upon that development process. Is that sufficient? Right now, the dedication of the open space and the additional easements has satisfied the stormwater engineer. I rely on the expertise of the stormwater engineer to guide my decision-making as well. That leaves me wanting, there's a gap between what I want and what we're getting. I would like to see further, this condition addressed further and more thoroughly upon future development plan submission. So it's a struggle. I'm struggling with that right now as well. But I don't think that, I think we already have a situation where we have a conflict between adjacent property owners. I trust the stormwater engineer and our staff to address those concerns in the development process as they come up going forward, to the extent that they can. It's not clear to me how much more can or will be done along those lines as this process goes forward, especially with this northern lot. So that is also my concern.
Commissioner Willie.
Sandy, are we the deciding body on the preliminary plat? This doesn't get forwarded to the city, this?
Correct.
Okay.
Your role is to approve the design of the preliminary plat.
Thank you.
Commissioner Weaver. You have some experience with water, so just.
And golf courses.
And golf courses.
Well, there's a lot to like about the project, but a lot to really gives me concern about the drainage. And I guess Commissioner Willie said that it's going to be a situation where buyer beware about that, especially that one lot. And if a building permit comes for that lot and some of this conversation comes up, it would seem to me might be a hard sell. So, but I do trust the stormwater engineer. I like the open space floodplain designation. I think that's a good move. And maybe we can do that some more places around the city if we don't get the stream setback ordinance in soon. I've seen a lot of places that really need it, so. I think I'm okay with the preliminary plat the way it is.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'd like to ask the applicant to come back up and address what we've been talking about. Can you give us any insights?
On the Tract A, where the floodplain in concern is, we initially had it a little bit smaller than that, and we expanded it to make sure that we encompass the entire floodplain and flood zone and flood area, so that won't be disturbed at all. And we've also added that drainage easement to the south, which is adding more drainage protection. And like you said, with the floodplain overlay zoning, I just feel like we've really added all the protections in that we possibly can by expanding outside the floodplain a little bit, as well as adding drainage easements. And I'm not sure what else we could possibly do to add more protection drainage-wise, other than what we've already done.
And do you feel what's left is a buildable lot, a marketable lot that's?
Absolutely, yes. I don't.
You don't have a good idea of scale from the.
Right, no, I understand. I believe that it has, and we've gone further, per city codes, as we've done the drainage study, and a professional engineer has told us that we're in good. What we've done is satisfactory.
Okay.
A professional engineer outside of the city, I should say.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I think I will be in favor of the preliminary plat.
Mr. Butler, any comments? We only have 6 of us, which is why I'm doing this stuff.
On people now.
I don't know.
What else do you need to know?
Well, I appreciate the applicant's comments because that helps a lot. I don't particularly care for this, but I'm leaning towards supporting it. I do appreciate those extra comments because that really helped, because before I was going to vote against it, but I do appreciate her comments.
I'm kind of where you are too. I'm not putting more properties, right along the floodways is kind of what we're trying to get away with. But we have all the city stormwater engineer says that they can work with this. I do think that the golf course is contributing quite a bit. And I don't know how that's going to be addressed, but somebody's going to address it eventually. And it might be the trigger is this new property. And a neighborhood action coalesces around it, perhaps. I don't know. But so I'm kind of leaning towards, given all the rules and everything we have and the reviews that have taken place, to support it right now. And trust staff will be on top of this. and that the neighbors will watch for it to show up at the city commission meeting so that they have their input and can review the final plans so they can weigh in on that with the city commission that can actually change the rules beyond what we can, if that's deemed necessary. Commissioner Ashworth.
Oh, I am not in favor of the preliminary plat. But I do not want that to be taken as that I do not trust the city engineer in any way, not being an engineer, but it is registering my concern about having greater buffers on our streams. So that's why I'll be voting against the preliminary plat.
Okay. So I guess that brings us to who wants to make the motion. Somebody. Commissioner Struckoff, you have it up. Do you want to make a motion, one way or the other?
Not at this time. I will wait for a motion in favor.
You would what?
I didn't hear that.
I didn't either. And I'm right here.
No, I'm not making a motion at this time.
And just if somebody would like to make a motion, I would refer you to the staff report where there are 2 action items that are spelled out.
You make the motion harder. It doesn't get any better up here.
Sorry.
Amy, do we make a motion on the variance separately, and is that second? We'll do that after. Okay.
I think that would be after. Looking at the 6 requirements under the staff's recommendation, are there any that would make anyone comfortable to add to it, or it'd be on number 3 on your computer now? The second, the staff recommendation, provision to revise preliminary plat to include the following 6 changes.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're stuck. Nobody wants to be the person to recommend anything.
I can't even bring up the report, so.
Yeah, the list of 6.
Are you?
I will. Go ahead.
Mr. Butler?
Mine's not coming up.
I move that we recommend approval of the preliminary plat for Quail Creek, subject to the following conditions listed in the staff recommendations, numbers 1 through 6.
Finally.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by,
You got it.
was that a second?
I think Commissioner Weaver got it.
Seconded by Commissioner Weaver. Any further discussion on the motion before we vote? All right, seeing none. All those in favor? It's 4. All those opposed? 2. It passes 4-2 at this time. That leaves us with the variance request to eliminate the requirement of a sidewalk at this time, with the requirement not to protest the formation of a special benefit district in the future. Any discussion on that? Commissioner Struckoff.
I would just note that even though there is sidewalk further to the southwest as Quail Creek Drive continues, and on the the Quail Creek Court, I noticed that to get there is a desert of sidewalks in between Castle and this crossing at the bridge. There are no sidewalks on any of those streets. So I'm okay with eliminating the requirement for the sidewalk, and I appreciate the agreement to not protest the benefit district. I'll support the variance.
Any other comments or questions about that? Or motion?
I move that we approve the variance request for the preliminary plat to allow the deferral of the sidewalk construction on one side of the street, and also understanding that they agree not to protest a benefit district in the future.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Struckoff. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Passes 6-0. Thank you. This time we'll take a 5-minute break so we can get Commissioner Sinclair back in here, and when we come back, we'll resume with the final agenda item. right, we'll be back in session. Item number 4, consider approving a preliminary development plan for Bauer Farm located at 4710 Bauer Farm Drive.
I've seen her sprinting.
And being out of breath isn't
If anyone can do it, you can.
Thank you. I appreciate that vote of confidence. So you have a revised preliminary development plan for Bauer Farm, and specifically Bauer Farm Northwest. And I make that distinction because this particular part of the development plan is somewhat independent from the rest of the project. So when we looked at when the applicant approached staff about the project, we did look at the criteria for what the requirements are to do a revision. And this actually resulted in the fact that we have to do a full amendment to the preliminary development plan. So that's the reason it is here in front of you tonight. If you'd also please remember that this is still under old code because it has that old zoning. So the process is preliminary development plan comes to this body, goes to the city commission. Final development plan will come back to this body. So the project is highlighted in red here in terms of what it actually encompasses. The overall development plan is included for context. None of the other properties within that phase change. So we do discuss it very generically and very broadly in the staff report, but all of the discussion in the heart of the discussion in the presentation tonight is about this specific property. So these 2 slides show you what the approved preliminary development plan looked like for this particular lot and what the proposed development plan will look like with this project. It is the last undeveloped lot in this particular phase. It does not include a drive-through. It does not include fast order food, which were 2 significant issues within this project. A couple of assessment items that we looked at throughout the staff report in the review. We're changing from a mixed-use project to a single-use project. The overall square feet of the building is actually smaller, so the impact of the project in a lot of ways is a reduced impact from the overall commercial area that is allotted or permitted within this planned development. The overall parking, the applicant actually is proposing a couple extra parking spaces over what the code would require. We did look at a couple of different analyses for the off-street parking, looking at it as if it were retail, also looking at under the current land development code as a contract construction sales and services, which this particular use falls under that category. We've gone from a 2-story building to a single-story building. The amount of open space actually does get reduced in this project. Over the 2, there's a little bit wider driveway to accommodate the interior truck movement that is needed with this project, or this use. The base zoning does not change. The allowed uses under the old code, paint store was actually a specific use. In this particular use category for the land development code, it's considered construction sales and service. So we've gone ahead and put both of those uses throughout the staff report for cross-reference. As I mentioned, we do not change the number of drive-through uses, which is a significant issue. That particular activity and land use is highly restricted within the larger planned unit development. Overall commercial square feet is reduced in the project. As I mentioned, there is a cap of 50,000 square feet within the development of this particular phase. The project is still far under that. A staff's recommendation is for approval of the preliminary development plan. There are a couple of original waivers or reductions that were allowed by the Planning Commission to grant for reduced setbacks to provide buildings closer to public streets. Some of those waivers are still applicable because we were talking about the total planned unit development for the Bauer Farm Northwest, so your approval of this project includes those waivers. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just before we start, to clarify, This is going to be a one-vote item just to approve the preliminary plat because we're not modifying any of the variances.
Yes, I
We're
just want to
saying
bring
that
it to
they
your
all stay-
attention. That's,
They all stay as they are?
yes.
Okay, thank you. The applicant care to speak? I'm going to guess since you're the last people here, you're the applicants.
That is correct. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Corey Frake with Wall Development Group. We're the applicant on this project. Sandy summarized it very sufficiently, so I'm just here to answer any additional questions you may have.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
This time we open the matter to public comment. Seeing no public remaining, I'll bring it back up to the commission. Any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Commissioner Williams.
So Sandy, you mentioned there were 2 additional parking spaces, but that we were a little short on open space because of the driveway. Is that something that staff is interested in having, considering that there's quite a lot of shared parking development?
There is quite a bit of shared parking, except for when Theodore Lawrence is in operation. So the only other ideal use for this property would have been a straight-up parking lot. So staff is supportive of the additional parking in this particular project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Or a motion? Commissioner Sinclair?
I'd be happy to make a motion.
All right.
Carry some weight around here, unless anybody wants to say anything. I move that we approve the revised preliminary development plan for Bower Farm Northwest plan development to the reduced building setback from 15 to 11 feet, and including the site waivers and variances outlined in this report, all based on the findings of fact presented in the body of the report.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second by Commissioner Struckoff. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 7-0. And that concludes the agenda for this evening. I'd make a motion that we recess our meeting until Wednesday, February 26th at 6:30 p.m. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Second by Commissioner Butler. All those in favor? Passes 7-0. We're recessed until Wednesday night.
It wasn't so bad.
No, very surprised.